Following a final devastating decision from the palace, Meghan Markle is now pleading directly with King Charles in a stunning turn of events that has shocked the royal world. It's finished. Tensions simmered behind closed doors for months. However, insiders claim that Meghan never anticipated the bold, immovable line that the king's most recent ruling has drawn. What then took place behind the royal walls? Why has the king adopted such a firm stand? Come along as we dissect Meghan's last-ditch effort to please King Charles. King Charles's ultimate choice regarding Meghan. Meghan Markle has finally made the choice she never really thought would happen. Silently, in private, and with such absolute finality that those who saw it claimed there was no room for argument, charm, or persuasion. According to senior palace insiders, King Charles has now made what they refer to as his final decision regarding Meghan. Not only does this decision close a door, but it also closes an entire chapter, something that many in the monarchy never would have imagined he would dare to do. And I believe that a lot of that is obscured by the clickbait culture, which can be extremely dehumanizing. Additionally, the words that came out of those palace rooms with high ceilings weren't loud or passionate. There were no dramatic pauses or raised voices. Rather, they were composed, methodical, and delivered in the quiet, firm tone Charles only employs when his thoughts are fully formed. It's finished. Charles had been under increasing pressure in the days preceding this to act gradually at first, then more forcefully over the weekend. Because the king had given Meghan more room and patience than many thought she deserved by permitting her to have a long, chaotic, unpredictable chapter that started the moment she entered royal life, not a marriage or a title. And at last, that chapter is now closed. Montecito responded right away to the king's final decision. Meghan froze, according to sources. Harry was caught completely off guard as her team went into full panic mode. The palace acted with complete clarity for the first time in a long time. No hesitancy, no weaknesses, no fear of the inevitable public backlash. According to insiders, Prince William was greatly irritated by Meghan's continued use of her HR styling for years after the late Queen Elizabeth II told her not to. Charles wasn't attempting to make amends this time, though. He had no intention of making concessions. He had spent decades trying to maintain peace, but he wasn't doing that now. Charles made a final, irrevocable decision this time. Therefore, if you are the Prince of Wales or the heir, you cannot be the same as the sovereign. One that shuts the door entirely. And what the palace refers to as a necessary final boundary is where it all starts. Meghan never thought Charles would enforce such a boundary. A line that transforms everything. A lot of people forget. It would be extraordinary, William once remarked, if Harry wanted to attend the coronation. An indication of the extent of the family's disintegration. One veteran royal observer stated, "I don't think there is a way back." However, what compelled Charles to take action in order to realize that? You must take a look at what has been going on for months behind the palace walls. Neither a single headline nor a single documentary caused this. There was more than one public comment or interview. There was more than one speech or podcast moment. Slow, steady, and unavoidable, it was a pattern. Long before the public became aware of it, senior advisors had been observing an increasing escalation. According to palace insiders, Meghan's recent appearances, brand teasers, and public messaging have caused Charles to become extremely concerned. The distinction between her personal brand and the royal legacy was muddled by high-profile projects, subtly alluded to royal life, and wording that was carefully chosen to imply she still had an active royal connection. In other words, Meghan was deliberately arranging herself so that, despite having left the institution, she appeared to be still there. We certainly long for that after the pandemic and everything else. Crave the ability to get high and feel like, but now there are repercussions. William is allegedly planning a significant campaign behind the scenes that could lead to the removal of several minor royals' titles. An indication that the monarchy is strengthening its organization and getting ready for a more rigid, efficient future. The king initially decided to remain composed. He didn't react, he didn't hurry, and he didn't follow his feelings. Rather, he observed, listened, waited, and silently hoped that everything would calm down on its own. However, what palace insiders now refer to as the last wave of warning signs appeared. The day everyone understood that the situation was no longer benign. It began with the introduction of a new brand, followed by a well-prepared public speech, a series of high-profile meetings, and an unexpected international campaign that startled senior officials when they realized what it actually implied. But the king was personally affected by one problem. Catherine. Long after leaving her royal responsibilities, Meghan's continued reliance on the monarchy's authority, symbols, history, and prestige became painfully evident. In order to lower inflation and lower the cost of living for families, advisors started alerting King Charles behind closed doors that this was starting to seriously harm the family's reputation. Something that, if they didn't take immediate action, could easily spiral out of control. Then everything changed when one advisor bluntly stated, "Your Majesty, this will not stop on its own." For the first time, there was full agreement from all of the top advisors, including senior protocol officers, legal specialists, and communications teams. The monarchy had to move swiftly and forcefully. Not after the next controversy, not after the next publicity gimmick, and not next month. Now, because they were afraid Meghan would change the whole royal story by tomorrow if they didn't establish a clear boundary today. Thus, King Charles made a choice away from the public and behind locked doors. According to insiders, the decision was years in the making and directly resulted in Meghan hearing the words she never thought the palace would say again. "It's finished." When Charles received the warnings, he had private meetings with senior advisors. The palace was placed under a controlled, nearly silent lockdown by King Charles. It's evident that even though we may not have a common past, this response, which is calm but unmistakably serious, is neither dramatic nor messy. According to sources, the king started a series of intense, multi-day high-level meetings that were heavier, more urgent, and more comprehensive than the previous ones. These check-ins weren't cordial. The most influential individuals within the organization attended these crisis meetings. Legal strategists, protocol specialists, advisors, senior communications leaders, and the Privy Council, who only step in when the monarchy is in grave danger. According to one source, Charles walked into the room with a composed yet unyielding firmness. He's firm enough to tell you that he knows the answer before anyone else does. Tables were filled with documents. Timelines were examined. Frame by frame and line by line, Meghan's public appearances, brand strategies, interviews, and subtle allusions to royal life were examined because they feel so inclusive, have representation, and resemble a charming love story. One advisor cautioned, "Sir, if you don't act now, you will lose control of the royal narrative." Another noted that Meghan's growing power in the US could lead to confusion on a global scale. There are two types of monarchies, an official one and an unofficial one. Even his closest advisors were taken aback by Charles's steady determination as he listened intently, without anger or impatience. The atmosphere in the room changed by the end of the last meeting. The palace would no longer wait for the next high-profile media appearance, the next leak, or the next documentary. They would take action with a decision that was so definitive and unchangeable that it could not be reversed, rather than with a press release or a gentle reminder. According to those in attendance, the king concluded the meeting with a single, silent sentence that felt like the end of a chapter. "We must close this chapter." And the monarchy's machinery moved in a matter of hours. Notifications were prepared, papers were written, and a covert courier was assigned. What was Meghan's reaction to the king's ruling? Let's investigate. Meghan's realization that it was over. There was no royal ceremony, no formal letter in a velvet envelope, no press release, and no courteous warning when King Charles's final decision arrived in Montevideo. It arrived discreetly and in a manner that made it obvious. Meghan was the only recipient of this message. Those close to the scene claim that Meghan was totally unprepared. "At first, I was just stunned, not upset or angry. After reading the message several times slowly, it finally dawned on her." Inside the house, advisors report that Meghan's tone swiftly changed from bewilderment to incredulity. "I believe you have a strong sense that it was ordained by God. Perhaps our friendship is turning into art." Then, in a complete panic, she demanded answers. "Who approved the decision?" she asked. She wished she knew if Harry had been told. She maintained that a misunderstanding must have occurred, but it didn't. Because this decision was final, in contrast to previous palace decisions that involved quiet corrections, subtle distancing, and behind-the-scenes adjustments. No compromise, no appeal, and no tactful language to lessen the impact. It came just as the king had planned, and it was the end. Everyone was stunned by her response, according to one insider. Meghan didn't anticipate this. Not now, not in this manner. One day, she always thought, the palace would leave a little window open for her. An opportunity to go back, to change the narrative, to fix what went wrong. However, this choice had the exact opposite effect. It permanently closed that window. 40 friends who are willing to give 40 minutes of their time to mentor a woman re-entering the workforce. Those present reported that Meghan started to pace the room, her steps erratic and restless. She tried to comprehend what had just transpired, and her voice trembled. She wanted to know why it was happening now, who had pushed for such a firm decision, and who had influenced the king. And everything about her changed when she realized that this was a final declaration rather than a suggestion or a warning. There were sobs, growing annoyance, and a strong feeling of betrayal. She was truly afraid that this was a pivotal moment that she would not be able to reverse. Meghan wasn't merely being disregarded or marginalized for the first time since she left the royal life. They were cutting her off entirely. And everything that came after. Her attempts to control the story, her hurried messages, and her phone calls all demonstrated how shaken she really was. At last, the palace had established a boundary. And Meghan found herself clearly outside of it for the first time. However, how did Harry react? Was he heartbroken, too? Let's examine it more closely. Harry's surprising response. However, Meghan wasn't the only one who was troubled by this choice. Prince Harry was the one who felt it the most. According to insiders, King Charles felt Harry should be informed directly rather than through a leak or a headline, which is why he was told before Meghan, not because he was being given preference or because she was being fired. However, that act of civility marked the beginning of something far more significant and agonizing. Harry's response, according to those familiar with the matter, was a mix of surprise, annoyance, and something more profound. A profoundly emotional understanding that he would never be able to completely protect the two worlds, no matter what he did. The spare and the heir are present. Well, I'm the spare and my brother is the heir. Thus, since 2018, he had been making an effort to stay together. Harry reacted emotionally, not loudly or angrily, when the king gave his explanation of the choice. He requested time. He urged his father to change his mind. He pondered whether the choice could be softened, postponed, or presented in a less severe light. King Charles, however, remained unmoved. The king's tone was calm, steady, respectful, but unwavering, according to a senior aide. According to insiders, Harry finally saw what he had been trying to avoid for years at that point. His father was not merely separating the public from the palace. He was drawing a boundary between Meghan and the organization. Everything in Monteito changed in an instant when Harry finally broke the news to Meghan. Both Harry and Meghan shed tears because he knew that no matter what happened, he would once more be forced into the role he detested the most. It kind of jumps in and out of the seriousness. You're a funny man. I'm funny. Yes. The bridge that connected two worlds that were no longer interested in meeting. It was straightforward, according to one source. Harry's anger wasn't limited to King Charles. The fact that he was unable to fix this devastated him. Not now. Father-son conflict has never been straightforward. However, a new kind of distance was created at this moment. It is painful, silent, and so deep that neither party knows how to fix it. And Harry wondered the same thing that everyone in the palace was murmuring behind closed doors, in those private moments he never discusses. What does Meghan's future hold if the king has truly made his final decision? Let's investigate. What does Meghan's future hold? It's finally here, the moment everyone has been whispering about, speculating about, and attempting to forecast for years. King Charles issued a formal written institution-level directive that is so absolute that it cannot be contested, negotiated, or reversed for the first time since Meghan left the royal life. Palace insiders claim that there are three main points in this final decision, each of which is more important than the others. First, without the palace's express written consent, Meghan will no longer be permitted to mention, allude to, or associate herself with the monarchy in any future endeavors, brands, or media campaigns. That is to say, the days of grey zone royal branding, in which she could imply a relationship without getting explicit consent, are officially over. Second, any residual royal courtesies or privileges, those meager, unofficial benefits the family hardly ever discusses, have now been completely eliminated. Travel benefits, symbolic connections, and discreet access to particular groups have all subtly vanished. According to one insider, it's a resetting of boundaries that ought to have been set years ago. Meghan will no longer have the palace providing her with protection from global scandals from this point on. There won't be any diplomatic buffering, softening remarks, or behind-the-scenes adjustments when disagreements emerge. For the first time, she will be completely independent without the palace's tacit assistance. One advisor was direct. This isn't a penalty. As we just heard, you will probably hear a variety of things this week. The institution is protected. But the tone of whispers inside the palace was more acerbic. It was more than just establishing boundaries, according to those who saw the finalized paperwork. The goal was to seal them. This was final, it wasn't merely symbolic, temporary, or for show. This is a game-changer for Meghan. The message was clear to everyone in the king's immediate vicinity. This concludes the chapter. Despite its strictness, the written document only provides half the story. Silently, the other half is given. The monarchy has spent centuries perfecting this kind of silence. Meghan was most uneasy about that silence. Insiders claim that King Charles made no attempt at reconciliation, included no lengthy explanation, or included a gentle preface. He just let the document do the talking. And everyone knew what it meant inside the palace walls. The monarchy is no longer on the defensive. Senior royals had made an effort to remain composed for years by taking criticism, staying out of conflict, and hoping things would work themselves out. However, this choice is a watershed. A senior courtier gave a succinct summary. Being silent is no longer a guarantee of safety. Boundaries are now indicated by silence. There is no more obvious boundary. The palace sent a message that didn't require signatures or justification by withdrawing privileges, limiting the use of royal identity, and declining to step in on Meghan's behalf in upcoming disputes. Personal branding will no longer be aided by the monarchy. This has nothing to do with rage or retaliation. It's structural. According to one insider, Meghan herself was not the king's target, rather, it was the pattern she represented and any future ones that might be similar. What Meghan might have thought was a brief hiatus or a PR freeze is now a permanent one. This is not a family dispute. It has to do with control over the royal narrative, legacy, and precedent. According to that story, Meghan has formally transitioned from a royal to a private person with all the restrictions that come with that position. It doesn't have to be stated out loud by the palace. It's already in the document. This concludes this chapter. It took place here at our cottage earlier this month. It was a few weeks ago. And without her influence, a new one starts. This could appear to be another dramatic headline, a private altercation, or a continuation of the royal feud from the outside. However, the ramifications are much more profound. According to senior royal analysts, King Charles's choice will affect the monarchy's long-term stability as well as the upcoming decade and generation. For many years, the palace believed that younger royals like Harry, Meghan, and their offspring could live on the periphery of the establishment without undermining its core principles. That presumption has gradually come to light. Pressures have been created by the emergence of influencer culture, the blending of royalty and celebrity, the monetization of personal narratives, and the attention that emotional storytelling has garnered in international media. It was never intended for the monarchy to manage. With her Hollywood experience, her enormous global fan base, and her knack for making headlines, Meghan became the most obvious illustration of how easily these boundaries could become hazy. What could Meghan do next? One advisor said bluntly, if we don't set boundaries now, there won't be any boundaries left later. Let's investigate. What will Meghan do next? People thought King Charles was too cautious, too lenient, and too willing to leave things open for months. However, this instance demonstrated something quite different. Charles takes decisive action when the integrity and reputation of the crown are in jeopardy, even if it means putting an end to a relationship that was once the talk of the town. His action is viewed as harsh by Meghan's supporters. It is long overdue, according to critics. The palace considers it essential. Punishing Meghan was never the goal here. It was about defending the monarchy against a future in which those outside the institution, rather than those inside, could define its identity, meaning, and image. Insiders were taken aback by the decision because it was strategic, permanent, and final, not because it was a dramatic one. It wasn't intended for today. It was designed to safeguard the monarchy for many years to come. There is one thing that everyone in the palace is aware of. Under duress, Meghan Markle doesn't keep quiet. The instant she understood that King Charles's choice was final, irrevocable, non-negotiable, and absolute, her whole staff went into action. In order to provide some context for my presence here and my work with UN Women, I would like to share a story with you. According to sources, Meghan called her advisors in the US right away. Hours later, not days. Media contacts, legal advisors, brand managers, and public relations experts hurried to evaluate the situation. Almost no one knows the public as well as Meghan does. Silence is a sign of defeat in her world. Damage control was the top priority. A well-crafted statement portraying the palace's decision as harsh or antiquated was taken into consideration by advisors. However, there was a risk involved. Another suggestion came to mind: a high-profile speech, a new documentary, or a significant interview that discreetly addressed institutional issues without mentioning the monarchy. Then, according to insiders, came the most alarming thought. Something that might intensify tensions by reclaiming the narrative through impending brand projects, a strategy Meghan has employed in the past when under duress. One source gave a direct description of the atmosphere. They had no intention of responding calmly. They had a counteroffensive planned. This is the problem. Meghan can't mention the royal family without running the risk of backlash due to Charles's restrictions. She must now completely reconstruct her public strategy without relying on the monarchy. Caution was advised by some advisors. Others called for reprisals. One thing, though, was universally acknowledged. Meghan won't keep quiet if she feels cornered. This is more than just a royal setback for her. It's a battle for narrative, which is where she is most effective. What she does next has the potential to either contain this crisis or make it a much bigger fire. It wasn't a meeting, a confrontation, or a public announcement that will be most remembered. After the last documents were signed, sealed, and added to the official record, the sentence was discreetly given behind closed doors. Good evening, distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. and Mrs. Bridges. Tene katoa. According to insiders, someone walked out of that room, inhaled, and uttered two words that are currently reverberating throughout royal commentary. It's finished. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was not sentimental. It was just final. The choice made by King Charles was neither a symbolic act nor a temporary boundary. It was a long-term structural decision that ended a chapter Meghan had thought she could go back to. Reconciliation is not something that the palace is waiting for. There will be no second chances, no cooperation, and no return. There was a line in the sand here. Meghan will have to navigate the future without royal association or protection. For Harry, it widens the gap between his birth family and the one he created. A gap that cannot be filled by calls or apologies. For King Charles, it signifies a change from tolerance to conservatism, demonstrating that defending the monarchy takes precedence over interpersonal relationships. Additionally, it marks a momentous occasion for the institution. However, what is the global response to this ruling? Let's investigate. The backlash on a global scale. It was never intended for the news of King Charles's ultimate choice to leave the palace walls. It was supposed to stay a tightly guarded secret, limited to the gates of Montecito and Buckingham Palace. However, such significant, absolute, and historic decisions are rarely kept a secret for very long. In a matter of days, murmurs spread, whispers became louder, and soon leaks appeared. Inquisitive reporters made an appearance where none had previously, posing unusual and incisive queries. Subtle alterations in official language were observed by royal observers. The story was detected by international media like blood in the water by sharks. The final decision started to appear in the news. It first surfaced in cautious, speculative reports. Articles then became more daring and quoted senior palace insiders. What should have been a private matter abruptly made headlines around the world. It was discussed by analysts on morning shows. It was deemed the end of an era by royal commentators. Editors rushed to obtain insider statements that would clarify the king's logic. There were headlines that were sympathetic to Meghan. Some were brutal. There was one unquestionable truth that almost everyone agreed upon. Meghan Markle's relationship with the monarchy had reached an irreversible breaking point. The atmosphere inside Monteito changed quickly. Damage control replaced panic and quickly became a defensive tactic. Meghan's team started keeping tabs on online trends, tracking every article, and getting ready for the impending worldwide wave. Experts cautioned that the effects of this attention would extend well beyond the news, impacting her reputation, brands, collaborations, upcoming endeavors, and her capacity to steer her narrative independently of the royal family. One insider called it a reputational earthquake. Then I said, okay, I've always loved being able to share. I've always loved once the world believes a door is closed, every move she makes is scrutinized through that lens. The kind that has the power to change public opinion for years. And there was silence in the palace. The kind of quiet that is more powerful than words. It was an obvious message. Without her, the monarchy would continue to function. However, Meghan was not going to remain silent. A counter-strategy was already developing behind Monteito's gates. It's calculated, daring, and possibly explosive, according to insiders. Her next move could start a storm, and the fallout had only just started. As the palace continued to operate in silence, Montecito took decisive action. Meghan Markle is crystal clear about one thing. Hesitancy is risky when the story turns against you. You turn quickly. Insiders disclose. She started putting together a comprehensive plan right away, not only for public reaction but also for long-term influence and survival. This was no longer a panic. This was a strategy in action. Her group broke the crisis up into smaller, more manageable chunks. Emotional leverage, legal boundaries, media opportunities, public perception, and brand positioning. Screens displaying news cycles, social sentiment charts, trending analytics, and influencer responses were arranged in a war room. They sketched out 3 potential routes. A silent reset is the first option. Displaying poise in public, avoiding confrontation or defensiveness, and allowing her subtle elegance to arouse empathy. Narrative reclamation is the second option. A feature, a controlled media appearance, or a documentary segment that highlighted the systemic challenges she encountered and framed the king's choice as a representation of the institution she abandoned. The third option is the direct counterattack, which is a strong, direct statement that subtly challenges the monarchy's authority while also hinting at injustice. According to insiders, her team subtly supports this course. Attention is generated by controversy. Influence comes from attention. However, the palace isn't the only obstacle Meghan faces. It is the regulations that Charles has now put in place. She can no longer allude to identity, symbolism, or royal ties without drawing criticism or possibly facing legal repercussions. Her brand, which was partly established on royal proximity, is severely damaged by this restriction. It was bluntly stated by a strategist close to her. Without the very factor that propelled her ascent, she must now expand her platform. Meghan is meticulously preparing her next course of action behind the scenes. Each step must respect the king's limits without going over them. Because a mistake now could cause the gap to grow too great to close. Regaining control and changing perception could be accomplished with a well-thought-out move. And somewhere in Monteito, during crisis meetings and strategy sessions, Meghan made a choice that her team did not anticipate. According to insiders, he might have to reconsider his choice. How do you feel about Meghan's impulsive attempt to appease King Charles? Please let us know what you think in the comments section. Remember to subscribe and like.